Hello and welcome to the lecture on initializing the properties with constructor. So let's see how do you initialize and pass values to constructors. Okay, we'll take our previous example. I'll create a copy of it. Let's take the same example that we have created previously and we will try to default this value to nothing. We'll delete the constructor. We'll delete the comments. Okay, when you are writing a class without a constructor, let's say you don't know about constructor, right, but you want to initialize some value before you start printing them, because when you print them it's empty, right? So you want to initialize them. So one way many people will do it without using constructor is like this. They directly change the properties. Okay, so let's execute this and then we will change along. So you can change the property directly by assigning the value and then print it. So it's also one way of initializing, but it's not a good practice, right? It's not a good practice to directly access the properties. Imagine a car, right? Imagine a car. When you're driving a car, basically you are driving with an steering and you're driving with, and you're changing gears with your gear rod, right? You're not going inside the car and then trying to directly change something in the engine. Okay, you're using this methods that is given to you, like an wheel where you sit and then you have a gear rod. Okay, you're using these methods to change all the elements of the car, right? Similarly, when you're accessing an object, you don't have to really change the elements or the property of that class. You have to do it via the method. That's why you should always use a getter and a setter method to change the values, not directly access the properties, but do it via a method. Okay, and there's one more way how you can initialize the values is via the constructor. Okay, so let's define our constructor. Okay, you can pass value, it's optional. So let's pass two values and let's assign them. And how do you access property inside a method? You can use $this. Okay, so this will assign whatever you pass in the constructor, and you are not calling the constructor. Then how do you pass this value? Let's understand that. Okay, so this is how the constructor parameters is passed. You pass to the class, and this parameter will be passed to the constructor, this parameter. Okay, and automatically the values are set, then you can see the value. But what happens here? Here you're not passing any value, because when you're not passing any value, what values does it go? So we just default it to optional parameters. Okay, so when you're not passing anything, it becomes an optional parameter and default values are empty. So empty values will be set to that variable, and then you pass something, then that value will be set to that property of the class. Okay, so it's a very good practice that you follow this convention. Okay, and always choose to have it optional, because sometimes you don't even want to pass it, sometimes you might want to pass it. So make sure it is optional so that you don't have to worry about both the cases. Okay, so once you execute, you can see the values coming up from both the different examples that we have, one directly changing it and one passing it via constructor. And basically this is the recommended way. Okay, always use constructor so that other developers, or it's easy for you to remember what is initialized inside the class. This is a placeholder for you to initialize things. Well, you can always initialize the properties from here. Okay, basically it's not a good practice. You don't have to initialize anything here. you always initialize via the constructor. And you know, when you pass in double quotes, it becomes a string value, and when you pass it a number, it becomes an integer. Okay, so to define a data type for that specific property, you can do it via the constructor as well. Okay, so remember the recommended way how you should initialize the constructor with properties, and if there is no properties, make sure it is default values. That's all the lecture on initializing the property with constructor, and I'll see you in the next one.